Yeah, we've had welcome everybody as you come on board here. We're just going to chat for a minute as people gather. Um, Gretchen, we've had, I think, pushing 600 people so far register for this. So some fraction of them will be here live, but it's nice. It's well attended. A lot of people have been interested in your book and you. So I'm
Oh,
very glad about that. Yeah,
that's so great. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
so thrilled. It's fun to see everybody flooding in.
I know it's kind of exciting. It's like, oh, open the doors, they come into the room and we're still sitting up here on stage, getting organized, tying our shoes, adjusting our earbuds, and all the rest of that. Uh, I think I'm going to let people come in for maybe another minute or so. And maybe I'll ask you a question for the early arrivers. You're a very experienced public speaker, interviewee. You've been doing this a lot, and I'm just kind of wondering, and I'm also putting myself in your shoes, what you do that is sensory to ground yourself in those first few breaths or minute or so, or as you kind of get ready to be present in a presentation environment like this one,
Hmm.
right?
There are two things I do. If I'm sort of on stage and I'm getting settled, sort of like in the moment of being on stage,
Yeah.
I feel my feet on the floor. I find that to be
Okay.
really helpful.
I'm going to do the
So
same.
yeah, there's just something about it's literally grounding. It's like my feet are on the floor.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like you want to have your stance kind of right.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that I found, and this was this in writing Life in Five Senses, I understood why I was doing things that I had sort of not even noticed that I'd been doing in the past, or I didn't
Right.
understand why I had doing them. And one of the things that I realized is that I will often hold a pen. This is like my comfort object. This is like my teddy bear as an adult.
You're
And
binky.
yeah, and when I'm behind, like backstage or something, I'll hold a pen in my hand, or like if I'm going even into something like a cocktail party where I don't know anybody and I feel like I
Yeah.
want to have something, I'll hold on to a pen. And I've talked to people who hold mugs or clipboards or like a little like polished stone. There's just something about holding something in your hand that can be very comforting. And sometimes when I walk on stage, I mean, some places it would seem sort of conspicuous and odd, but sometimes it feels very natural. And I'll just hold a pen, and maybe it's because I'm a writer. It makes me feel like I'm ready to take a note, if the need strikes. But I think a lot of it's just holding something in your hand.
What, what does that do for you to hold an object in your hand?
It just makes me feel more grounded, more comforted. And
Mm,
it's something that I've done for years, and I never really thought
mm,
about it. I
mm.
would sort of think like, well, why do I feel like I want to have a pen if I'm in a situation where I don't even have any paper? And if I wanted to, I could just use, you could take a note on your phone. It's
Mm,
not, it's not practically necessary. And yet I like, if I have pockets,
mm.
I'll always have a pen in my pocket. So I always have a pen like ready to go. And this was just something that I realized, our brains are in our hands. Our hands are very
Yeah.
important for our thinking, and having something to hold is very, very
Uh,
comforting.
for those of you who are just arriving, I deliberately took a chance here and during the first couple of minutes of people landing to just jump in and ask Gretchen live right here and now what she does to draw on her senses to be prepared for a presentation, such as we're doing right now in this online Zoom platform. And so Gretchen was speaking to that. And if I could just build on the last thing you said, and then I'll segue into a proper introduction of you and welcome of everybody. When I was thinking to myself, what's the neurological, the neurophysiological, psychological process whereby holding an object in your hand? Now, do you hold it in your dominant hand? Are you left-handed or?
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
left-handed.
that's very interesting right there. So you're holding it in your dominant hand, which for you is your left hand, um, and that gives you a sense of comfort and why. And just like you said, we think in our hands, we think through our hands in part. In a way, one of the things that's, you may know this in brain evolution, is that the motor planning systems of the brain, which are more advanced in humans than probably any other species, co-evolved with our overall executive functions, which also co-evolved with our sense of self. And so I'm just imagining speculatively, but plausibly, that anchoring that sense of an object in the hand that's preparing to do something just by virtue of holding it could then tend to prime or mobilize those executive systems that are related to planning action and the use of language as well, which is sequential, much like motor planning. They co-evolve together, so that you're really ready to go. You're in a stronger position. Just that little priming, which then speaks to the larger point, as you know, about embodied cognition, that when we do things physically, whether it's power posing or holding a pen in our hand, or I'll do a thing where I'll touch a button on my shirt, that's a way for me to kind of center in my heart, that sort of, physicality of that. That those physical activities at a sensory motor level, that's the foundation of our psyche and the development of our own consciousness from infancy onward. That engaging that sensory motor level can support our thought, our sense of self and our consciousness altogether, as well as our effectiveness, which, sorry, it's
No,
my kind of riff on what's
no,
super cool about your
it's
book.
no,
Yeah.
it's a fascinating, it's sort of brain and mind, house and home,
Yeah.
and how they're related is endlessly fascinating. And there's so much new
Oh,
research all the time.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that's great. Well, proper introduction. So, this is my colleague, my friend, Gretchen Rubin. I've known Gretchen for quite some time. She skyrocketed into well-earned fame with the Happiness Project, right? The first book. And one of the things that's just been really striking for me about you, Gretchen, along the way is that as people comment, I mean, you're brilliant, you're well trained, you're incredibly effective, and I've really come to appreciate what a big heart you have. Really,
Wow.
that's for real. So thank you very much for being here. And for those who are joining us, this is being recorded. You'll have access to the recording later. We've had, I think, over 600 people so far registered for it. Many of them will be watching the recording, which is great. And Gretchen's latest book is Life in Five Senses. I want to make sure I get and the subtitle is How I Learned to Get Out of My Head and Into My Feelings. So what's the
Yeah.
subtitle?
How I learned to get out of my head and into the world. Yeah.
There you are. That's exactly right. So we're going to be exploring that and also the relationship between coming into our senses and living in this world with more compassion for ourselves and for other people. That's kind of the intersection here. And
Yes.
so I wonder if we could just start there. I mean, your book begins in effect, or your journey relates to an issue with your eyes, concern about maybe a detached retina, something. And I just kind of wanted to note that the entry of this book involved a recognition of suffering in some sense, right? You were facing a personal issue that could have personal consequences. And I just kind of wonder about the connection between, an empathic tenderness for yourself and what you were dealing with, then mobilizing you in your characteristic ways to move into a body of
Yeah.
knowledge and really kind of dominate it and really learn about it and then offer the fruits of that to other people. But in a way, it started with suffering and a compassionate response to that. And I wondered if you could speak to that as even a kind of framing.
Well, yes, I had a bad case of pink eye, so I went to the eye doctor. And as I was getting ready to leave, he said, very casually, as if he were saying, be sure to wear sunscreen or wear your sunglasses. He said, be sure to come in for your regular checkup because as you know, you're more at risk of losing your vision, which was a big shock to me. I didn't know that I was at great risk of losing my
Yeah.
vision. And I was so like, why? And he said, well, you're extremely nearsighted. And that puts you more at risk of having a detached retina. And we would want to address that right away. And I have a friend who had just lost some of his vision to a detached retina. So that felt like a very real possibility to me. And of course, I could have a rich, meaningful life if I lost my sight or, more of my senses. But it was just, and sort of as you were intimating, often we don't appreciate what we have until
Yeah.
we think we might lose it or we do lose it. And this just showed me how precious my sense of sight was to me. But as I live in New York City, I was getting ready to walk home, but I was looking out on the street and I was sort of like, here I am thinking about how precious my sense of sight is. I didn't notice one thing on my way over here. I was so stuck in my head. This cityscape is happening all around me. I'm not noticing it all. I'm just lost in my own thoughts. And at that moment, it was like, every dial in my brain got turned up to 11, and I could see every detail with crystal clarity. I could hear every sound on a separate track. I could smell every smell, and I live in New York City. It's quite smelly. It all was just rushing over me for my whole walk home. And I realized this is happening all the time. There's nothing special about it. It's just that I'm paying attention. And yet it's kind of this transcendent, almost psychedelic experience because I'm just really awake to it.
Yeah.
And that's what showed me like this. I've been studying happiness for such a long time. And yet I knew there was something that I was missing. There was a piece that I was overlooking. And I realized that this is how I could connect with myself, and just as important, how I could connect with other people through my five senses. So that's how, yeah, it was sort of compassion for myself and for others.
That's great. So I have some kind of big picture questions for you, but I thought we could start by a few examples of some of the things you investigated related to senses. There's a ton of fascinating detail in your book. And I have to say, as someone who's cranked out a few myself, you write so well.
Oh, well,
You
thank
write
you.
so well. You really do. You have this way
Thank
of
you.
weaving together personal story, fascinating information, this kind of friendly voice and perspective that again and again and again translates into practical action. So it's kind of
Oh, well,
you're hitting the
thank
trifecta or
you.
quad,
Okay, thank you.
whatever, of writerly skills.
Yeah.
Okay, so some examples maybe related to some of your senses of some of the specific things you explored and some interesting things you found. I don't know, maybe smell or some other things you found, and then we'll kind of pop up to maybe some big picture perspectives.
Right. Yeah. Well, I went into one of the things that was really interesting to me, and again, this goes to your central theme of compassion, which
Yeah.
is that a lot of us have certain senses that we appreciate more and certain senses that we neglect
Aha.
more.
Yeah.
And so with an appreciated sense, like you turn to it for comfort and pleasure, you use it to engage with other people, you like to learn about it, you like new experiences. With your neglected sense, you sort of, you're not paying much attention to it. And it's good to know your neglected sense because that's where you have low hanging fruit. This is where you have a lot of things that you can try and do that you haven't been tapping into because you neglected. And if people want, I now have a quiz after I handed in the book. I was like, I got to make a quiz. So if you go to GretchenRubin.com/quiz, you can take a quiz and it will tell you your neglected sense, which again, and give you ideas for how to harness it.
And
Super
we're going to
fun.
include a link
Yeah,
to that in the notes here
good.
and
It's
also in the YouTube broadcast.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
A lot of
super
people are
fun.
watching this through YouTube or Facebook.
Okay, yeah. So it's very easy it's like 9 questions, super, and tens of thousands of people have taken it.
Yeah.
But what I found is, so I really appreciate the sense of smell. That's one of my top, most appreciated. But for a lot of people, they don't really think about their sense of smell. And this is like traditionally in the West, it has been considered kind of like a bonus sense, kind of like a nice to have sense. But sadly, I think because of COVID,
Yeah.
people really, I think a lot of people either lost their sense of smell themselves and with it kind of their sense of taste, or knew somebody who did and realized like what a loss it is, like what a central aspect of our sense of vitality and engagement the sense of smell is. And I love the sense of smell. So I love perfume, and the more we know, the more we notice. It's like once you start studying bird watching, like you see so many more birds.
Yeah.
So I took a perfume class because I thought, oh well, if I really know what I'm smelling, I'll appreciate it more. And one of the things I learned, and this is something people can try at home, which is, how with our ears, we hear slightly different and that helps us like locate sounds.
Right.
And with our eyes, we see slightly different and that gives us, depth perception. Well, with our nostrils, we actually smell slightly differently with our two nostrils. And if you go like this and go like this and smell something like a jar of pickles,
Huh.
you just something with a strong smell, you'll see it smells slightly different on one side and the other. And so if you see, kind of, experts waving something below their nose, that's why they're doing it. It's so that they really get the full intensity from both nostrils. So this was the kind of thing that just enchants me because I'm like, or if you want to increase your sense of smell, you get your blood flowing, run up and down the stairs a few times, do some jumping jacks. And this is what smell experts sometimes do to like give themselves like a, so I don't know, it's like you're getting ready to have Thanksgiving dinner and you're like, I really want to, I want this to be, the best possible. Get that blood flowing to your nose. And
Jumping jacks before the
yeah,
turkey
no,
comes
the
out.
whole family, let's all do it. We're going to appreciate this turkey. Yeah, no, so, and just, just noticing this, the smells of the people around me, like the
Yeah.
smell of shampoo and the smell
Mm.
of toothpaste and all the little smells that we associate with people.
Interesting. What's your neglected sense?
So my most neglected sense is taste. And here's the fascinating now.
That's
And I'm not,
counterintuitive because smell, taste, seem, but yeah.
yes, right, exactly. Yes. And here's what's interesting now, and I'm not saying that this is scientifically proven because of the selection bias, but now that tens of thousands of people have taken the quiz, one thing that has surprised me is that in terms of what sense is the most neglected, it's very evenly distributed, surprisingly to me. But when it's looked at most appreciated, the two most appreciated senses really dominate, and that's taste and hearing, which are my two most neglected senses. So it's interesting, like when I say like, oh, I'm stuck in my head, I truly am less tuned into major sources of pleasure for other people because those score very high for other people. So for me, I had a lot of low-hanging fruit with taste because I'm one of these people where I eat the same foods every day. Like I'm very unadventurous. I didn't use it to connect with other people. So I had all kinds of fun tapping into my sense of taste because I hadn't really thought about it much. And now I get so much more, I evoke memories and I've connected with other people and just delight in the sense of taste so much more now that I've really focused on it.
Have you found any kind of correlation, let's say, between primary sense and also neglected sense and personality types or temperaments or ways of being in the world?
I don't have the big data that I would need to sort that out.
Just observing that.
Right. But, but it's interesting that you say that because, so I don't know if people are familiar with my other, the kind of quiz or my big personality framework, which divides people into 4 tendencies. Again, you can take that quiz at gretchenrubin.com/quiz. That divides people into upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. What's interesting to me is in my observation, that is hardwired. You're born an obliger and you stay an obliger. You're an obliger at work and you're an obliger at home. That's just part of what you brought into the world with you. But with the neglected sense, this is something that really changes over time. And I've spoken to many people who will say, well, I used to really be tapped into my sense of hearing as a young person. I played music, I listened to music, I went to concerts. But ever since I've had kids, I've just completely put that to the side. And so it's kind of interesting to notice, well, maybe it's not the season of your life to appreciate that sense, but maybe this is something where you can think, okay, well, I can't go to a concert because I can't get a babysitter, but I could make more of an effort to listen to new music or to play music when maybe right now I'm not playing music so that I can or maybe I could practice guitar again, for 10 minutes a day and bring it back in. Because if you enjoyed it at one time, you'd probably enjoy it now, even though the circumstances of your life had led you to neglect it right now. So I think that is something that is very affected by experience, circumstances, time.
So we can learn. We can learn
Absolutely.
to come to our senses.
Absolutely, we can. And I think there's some people who do this naturally. There's some people where they describe their neglected sense. And I'm like, wow, to me, you sound very tuned into that sense. They score very high in kind of sensory awareness. And then I think there are people like me where we just get up in our heads and we don't see the ocean because we're thinking about our to-do list, or we're not. And so I think for some people it's more effortful. It needs to be a more conscious, mindful practice to connect through the senses and really get that vivid, energizing, rich sense of the world.
Yeah, that's great. Were there some oddball facts you stumbled onto that just really struck you?
Yeah. Elephants can hear the sound of approaching clouds. That's bonkers. Oh, here's one. Ketchup. Okay. Heinz ketchup is kind of a magical food. And it makes sense because it is the secret ingredient in many, many popular foods like barbecue sauce, meatloaf, pad thai, Thousand Island dressing. A lot of things have ketchup that you would not expect. And Heinz ketchup is one of the rare foods that hits all 5 of the basic tastes. It's sweet, it's sour, it's salty, it's bitter, and it's umami. And so one of the things that I did to bring taste into the forefront was I had a taste party with my friends, because I went to Flavor University for 2 days, and I love doing comparisons. Like, let's compare 6 different kinds of milk,
Yeah.
cream, whole milk, half and half. Like, it's just, when you really compare, you can really taste a lot more distinctions than you might think. And so I gave everybody a little dollop of Heinz ketchup and asked them, what do you think? And everybody was like, this is so bonkers. It is so complex.
Yeah.
It's so sophisticated. It's like there's so many things exploding in your mouth. And we've all eaten Heinz ketchup a million times. We got packets falling
What's
out
the point of French fries without ketchup?
and it's just kind of this ubiquitous thing. But then when you really stop and taste it. Now, I quit sugar years ago, so I don't really eat ketchup because it does have a lot of sugar in it. But for me, this was like, this is a taste sensation that I haven't experienced in a long time, and I cannot believe how good it is.
Yeah.
So it's funny because ketchup we kind of use it as sort of like, oh, it's this like nothing condiment that sort of stands for people kind of just glopping it all over everything. You're like, there's a reason that it's so popular. It's because it has all 5, and something like a margarita has 4, but it doesn't have umami. It's hard to get to 4. It's really hard to get to 5.
What happens if you put ketchup in a margarita? But I don't think
Oh,
that would
wait,
be very good.
that? Okay, we'll try that. Put it in the blender and see
ketchup
what you
and
got.
tequila. I've never heard of
Yeah.
that together, but
You know what, though? I bet I would give it a shot. You know what I mean? It's like weirder. But yeah, who knows? Is that a bloody? Maybe it would turn into a Bloody Mary.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Did you bump into any kind of, I guess blocks, obstructions for particular people or kinds of people related to particular senses?
Well, yes, and this is very interesting because this also came up with a neglected sense, which was that for many people, they reported to me that they would deliberately neglect a sense. Like for them, it was very effort. They were doing it on purpose. Like for instance, the sense of smell. For some people, it would trigger migraines or allergies, and so they would very deliberately turn away from it. Or somebody was saying how her sense of touch, she very often did not like things that had a sense of touch, so she couldn't use like a water pick because the vibrate, that just gave her the heebie-jeebies. And so some people sort of deliberately turn away, but then often what I would suggest and what they sort of figured out on their own is like, okay, well, maybe certain kinds of smells can give you a migraine, but certain kinds of smells don't. And so maybe you can walk on the beach and really enjoy the smell of the seaweed and the wind and the ocean and the sunscreen, and that's okay. Whereas like if you're in a grocery store where there's a lot of, kind of intense smells, like there you're sort of like, okay, I don't want to be like inhaling deeply because that might cause me an issue. Another thing is that, and this I didn't see coming at all, was for some people, if they really, really use a sense a lot in their work, they tend to neglect it in terms of like, it's not that they're not using it, but they're not turning to it for comfort or pleasure or exploration or connection. They're just using it in a very workmanlike way. Like I talked to somebody who works in Hollywood as a producer, and she said, all day long, I'm watching, editing, evaluating. And she's like, when I go home, I want to just listen to music and have my eyes shut. So it wasn't that she was neglecting it in terms of not tapping into it, but she was using it as a tool. And so she didn't want to turn to it for pleasure. And so that's an interesting distinction that hadn't really occurred to me until I started hearing from a lot of people who were, working through their own responses.
Yeah. On the practical side, as I kind of imagine my way into this myself, to become more into the senses, I'm imagining that there's the aspect of bringing attention, simply bringing attention and sustaining attention, and then enjoyment, and then finding enjoyment, the two together.
Yes.
So can you build on that?
No, I mean, a lot, it's all happening. It's just that we're not paying attention to it. And so the big challenge is, how do we stay alert to it,
Mindful.
mindful of it, because what's familiar is easy to ignore.
Yeah.
And so we need to find ways that suit ourselves. And one of the things, the book is full of all the things that I tried,
Yeah.
but what I like is when people are like, oh, I got this idea, like you did that, that's not interesting to me, but I thought, well, I'll do it this way.
Yeah.
Because what I do is not that important. It's more that it's just to spark other people's imaginations where, well, what sense do they want to tap into, and what kind of thing sounds interesting to them. I mean, one of the things that I did was to keep a 5 senses journal, where each day I would write down just not even like my favorite experience, but just a notable impression that I'd had. And that is because, you know, it's easy to feel changed, it's harder to stay changed. And I was like, I need something that is going to constantly remind me, pay attention, stay mindful, don't go back up into your head. And so this practice of every day writing it, just like a few words, like movie theater popcorn, you know, we all know that's smell, and it's
I'm
like,
tasting it right now.
right,
Num,
you know.
num,
And so I
num,
just
num.
write movie, so it's not like I like it because it's a way of of keeping a journal that is quick and easy, and yet has that feeling of sort of taking note, helping you to be mindful of your experience. And also, I don't know, I imagine many people on the call keep gratitude journals, and I have to say that I am the rare person who studies happiness who was deeply annoyed by keeping a gratitude journal. It did not work for me. But it turns out this is kind of a form of gratitude journal, because you really do feel like you are paying tribute to the beauty of the world. You're like, movie theater popcorn, I see you, I recognize you, you know, you are precious to me. So I found that it was kind of a backdoor way to keep a gratitude journal, in a way that because for whatever reason, I do not like that as a tool. Even though many people love it and swear by it. So this turned out to be a way that worked for me and helps me stay tuned into my 5 senses, for sure.
Yeah. I'm really struck by this sort of paradox of using verbal reasoning, intellect, cognition, right, analysis, to move beyond it, to use the head to move beyond the head, in other words. And I think about our culture very
A
much that,
Cohen, for sure.
uses the head and is stuck in the head. And you know, we become trapped by our strengths, right? We have such strengths with intellect, reasoning, control, verbosity, and so forth. And then how do we use that wise view, let's say, you know, to move beyond the words, to move into the lived experience, moment by moment by moment? It's interesting that, in other words, intellect is a vehicle. It's like the metaphor of the raft. You use the raft to cross the river, but then once you get to the other side, you've moved beyond it. And so I kind of wonder if I could ask you a personal question, not that I haven't been, in a global way, are you less in your head these days? Are you
Oh,
less in the stream
absolutely.
of intellect and more in the stream of sensing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I will find myself just sort of, and I do it sort of unintentionally, but you know, when your attention is captured by something, like you'll often stop, or
Yeah.
you know, you know, without even realizing it. And I will realize that I've sort of stopped in my tracks, and I'm just sort of paying attention in a way that I never used to do. So that's interesting. One of the things that I did as part of one of the exercises that I did for Life in 5 Senses was I decided to visit the Metropolitan Museum every day.
Yeah.
I'm so incredibly fortunate. I live within walking distance of the Met, and I have the time and the freedom to visit. And I'm a New York State resident, so I can visit for free, though I did join. And I go every single day. And because I'm very interested in repetition and familiarity and how things change when you do them all the time, which turns out a lot of people feel this way. Like, they'll do exactly the same walk with their dog, or they'll go to the same sit spot for forest bathing, or, you know, I think a certain kind of person is interested in that, seeing things change very gradually over time. But I've just noticed that the way that I move through the museum is very different. You know, now I will just sort of like really stop and look at something in a way that I didn't before, and kind of in an art appreciation way, but then sometimes not in an art appreciation way, just kind of in a, you know, like here's this stairwell, and this is a very plain stairwell. And if I were the head of the Metropolitan Museum, I think I would do something with the stairwell. What would I do with this stairwell? And I just stand there and think about it. It's like, I would never have done that in the past. It would never even occur to me to notice the stairwell and to think, why is this stairwell so plain? We could do something cool with the stairwell. I just wouldn't have thought of it.
Yeah. In a way, you're talking in part about expanding the capacity to be surprised,
Yes, absolutely.
to be open to
Yes.
the novelty, the freshness of the world, which
Yes.
resets our senses
Yes.
neurologically
Yes.
when we're alerted to something
The
new.
ability to be surprised.
Yeah.
Yes.
Expanding
That is a very, I think, underappreciated metric of
Yeah.
how attentive you are being.
Yeah.
Because the more you pay attention, the more likely you are to be surprised.
Yeah.
Because the more you know, the more you notice. And, an expert will see things that are surprising when a layperson would be like, oh, these all look the same.
Yeah.
And they're like, the Metropolitan Museum is a great place for that, where you're like, oh, these vases all look exactly alike. They're like, no, they don't.
Right.
They don't.
Yeah.
Or same thing with bird watchers. It's just like a bird is a brown bird is a brown bird. And they're like, what are you talking about? They're completely different.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that this bird is here in Central Park. It's like, it doesn't surprise me, because why would it be surprising? And so, I think the ability to be surprised, and it makes the world so much more interesting, but you have to be paying attention to be surprised.
Yeah. As you know, sensory activity, particularly touch, that sense, including internal touch, interoception, is really foundational to emotion and being more in touch with ourselves kind of globally. So I just kind of wondered also, have you found that as people become more attuned to their senses, that they become more open to the rich tapestry of their emotional experiences?
What a great question. I do not know. I would be fascinated to hear from people. I've heard from a lot of people reading the book. They haven't mentioned that specifically, but now I want to pose that question. I think it's definitely true for me. I hadn't thought about it, and I hadn't linked those two things together as directly as you've put it. But now that you say it, I can't believe that I haven't been thinking about that. That's a really, really interesting, valuable question. And I think that is true. I just think and again, we constantly use these metaphors from the senses. So the more in touch you are with the world, the more in touch you can become with yourself, absolutely, and with other people as well. So no, I think that's I hadn't thought about it, but I think it's absolutely true.
That's interesting. Just to build on that, I'm a longtime therapist, as you know, and just the difference between reporting on our interior, compared when we're talking with other people, like a dispatch from a distant battlefield from some journalist, right? Reporting on our interior is so different from feeling it while you say it, experiencing it while you communicate it, right?
Yeah.
And sensory awareness, especially, interoception, is really central to being able to communicate in that way that can feel more authentic to other people and more integrated to oneself.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's interesting also on the subject of compassion, which, you're such a thoughtful observer and commenter. On one of the ways that it really affected my feeling of compassion is to realize, intellectually, I knew, okay, yeah, we all live in different sensory universes, and maybe you have color blindness and you are a super taster, and so this tastes more bitter to you. I knew that intellectually. But I have to say, it is so striking when you actually realize people are in completely different sensory universes. And so if somebody says to you, this is really annoying to me, you can't say, what are you talking about? It's no big deal, because you don't know what their sensory universe is.
Very good.
And an easy way to see this, if you remember back to 2015, when the internet was exploding because people were trying to figure out, was the dress white and gold or was the dress blue and black? I cannot see it as blue and black, even though that is the actual color of the dress. I cannot see it. Usually with optical
I actually
lenses,
missed that meme, but I'm aware of the fact of it.
Yeah. Well, what's funny too is because a lot of times with things like this, the experts are like, "Oh, well, you lay people are surprised, but it set up a huge amount of research into eyesight because the experts were like, what is going on?"
Yeah.
But okay, so that's one very kind of colorful example, but you can't smell your home the way a guest smells it, because, you were talking about novelty before. The brain is looking for novelty. And with something like a very familiar smell, it doesn't bother to alert us. And
Yeah.
so you could walk into my apartment and your eyes would be watering because of the smell of cats or air freshener or cologne or whatever. And I would not smell it because I cannot smell my home. It's too familiar to me. If I left for a month and came back, then I could smell it, but I can't smell it. Or like I'm in New York City, I'm recording in New York City. Sometimes like sirens go by and the other person will say, hey, can we stop because of the sound of sirens? I don't hear it. My brain just puts that
It
into the
tunes it out.
background.
Yeah, I hear
Because,
every bit of it when I come to New York City.
but see, because my brain is like, you don't need to know
Yeah,
that.
you're habituated. Yeah.
No, and when I quit sugar, this was one of the things that was
Yeah.
surprising to me is people were like, well, what about all those food cues? Aren't you like
Yeah.
always like bombarded with these like sweet
Yeah.
smells? And so I'm like, I'm not. And I don't know why, because I have such a sweet tooth. But I'm really not. And I realized because, pretty quickly my brain was like, this
Yeah.
isn't useful information. We're going to pull this into the background.
Right.
And so you're walking into the office and your experience of that office could be quite different from somebody else's experience of that office. Or you're getting, you've got a certain kind of outfit on and someone else is like, how can you wear clothes like that? And someone else is like, what are you talking about? It's fine. And somebody else, it's too scratchy. It's too heavy. Some people don't like silky. I thought everybody liked silky. I thought silky was like synonymous with like feeling good. People they like, it gives them the heebie-jeebies to feel
People
something
vary.
silky.
Like, I think I can
People
out my wife in
vary.
this regard. There's actually a genetic variation in which literally some people are really annoyed by the sound of other people chewing food.
Oh, my daughter has that. Yeah. Yeah. What's the word for that?
I have no idea. Our daughter
Yeah.
also like
Oh,
detests the smell of
beyond.
mayonnaise and bananas, and but it's real. It's very real. Okay, so how did you think? Let's apply this to familiar people, right? So
Yeah.
one of the charming parts of the book is you talked about creating kind of a profile of your husband. So what
Yes.
happens when we turn up the sensory gain,
Yes.
in effect, the receptivity to keep people in our lives? How to do that? And does that lead to greater empathic attunement with them, which can open the heart?
Absolutely. And this is the most important thing. I mean, of course, if you had to pick one thing that is the crucial aspect of a happy life, it's relationships with other people.
Uh-huh.
And I went into this thinking like, oh, I can use my five senses to like engage more deeply with the people I love. And I was just so astonished by how effective it is. And you're right. One of the things that I did, which I highly recommend, it's super creative. It's very thought provoking. It makes you feel so much closer to someone, is to do a five senses portrait of them. So I did a five senses portrait of my husband. And it's one of these creative projects where it's pretty easy to execute because you just write like seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and then write down 5 notable memories or associations. So it's easy to like do it as a creative project, but it takes a lot of thinking. So you have a lot of creative satisfaction. And what it did is like, because one of the superpowers of the senses is to help evoke memories, because there are memories that we have, but we haven't tried going looking for them. So we haven't like brought them to the forefront of our minds. And by really going back, when we first met, when we were in law school together, when we were first married, when we were on that trip, what about our honeymoon? Like really going through all of those things. It just woke up a bunch of memories of my time with my husband in a way that was really beautiful. And then I could give it to him and say like, it's like you feel seen, you feel heard, you feel tasted, you feel touched, you feel smelled. But what's even more interesting to me, so I have the podcast Happier with Gretchen Rubin, and my sister and I, my sister's my co-host, we talked
By the way,
about
it's a
this.
phenomenal podcast.
Oh, well,
and it's
thank
so
you.
charming to listen to both
Oh,
of you.
thank you.
And what a great balance. So yeah, super duper, highly
Yeah,
recommended.
it's fun. We so enjoy doing it. So we talked about this five senses portrait on it. But what was interesting to me was how people took it in different directions depending on what they wanted. So a lot of people used it for someone who had died, because they're like, I want to hold on to those concrete memories.
Yeah.
I want to keep them vivid in my mind. What was the name of my grandmother's perfume? What was the smell of the backyard after my uncle mowed the lawn? And like that helped them hang on to it. And also what it allowed them to do was sort of to share the memory of someone with someone who maybe would never meet that person. Like you have a grandchild who's never going to meet that beloved grandparent, but you're like, here, I can communicate to you what that person was like in a real way. Also, people use it as a gift. because
Yeah.
they're like, I'm going to create something for you, and that's going to communicate to you everything that is about you, and it's deeply satisfying to do. And then you can also, people do it as a like for an experience, like our trip to France, or a place that we love. Like we always go to the same little cottage in Vermont. What is our experience of Vermont? They do that as a family. Maybe a pet, you do it for like, a family activity, like let's do a 5 senses portrait of our pet. There's a lot of ways you can play with this, to do it by yourself, as a group, as a gift, as in memorial. Like it's one of
Beautiful.
these things where, and then because you've really made your memories concrete, then it's a great keepsake, because
Yeah.
you're like, this will help me remember this for, years to come.
That's really great. What a great exercise. There's a collection of things. Exercise sounds so onerous, right? But
No,
what
I
a
know, I know.
cool collection of things
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
do.
yeah. Like, yeah.
So in real time, in what I mean by that is in interactions with other people, let's say, um, where there's some depth to it. It's an important relationship. It's an important interaction. I find myself thinking about the ways in which turning up the volume, the gain on sensory awareness, especially seeing and hearing,
Yes.
um, can really bring in a lot of information about what other people are actually experiencing. The
Mm-hmm.
little micro movements around the eyes and the corners of the mouth that are very expressive of emotion and very revealing, that last like fractions of a second, or the subtle drop in tone at the end of a sentence. Things like that can really deepen empathic awareness and attunement in real time of another person, which then is, of course, a opening in the heart and becoming more
Mm-hmm.
connected and supportive of them and potentially compassionate. And I just kind of wondered if you started to expand your superpowers in that regard in important relationships, so that you became increasingly empathic in real time with other people.
I absolutely. I think that's so true. And again, it's one of the key ways, by being more open to that information, and more
Yeah,
observant, then we have a much more we can be much more attuned to what might be going on with somebody that they're not
yeah,
like explicitly telling us. One of the things, like I noticed, one of the things, just observing my husband more closely, like
yeah.
he has this thing that he would do. He would like look at himself in the mirror and kind of pat himself on the chest in the morning. And that's like, okay, Jamie, you got this. We got to go. And
Huh.
and I had sort of, again, I'd kind of unconsciously noticed it, but not really noticed it. And then it became this incredibly endearing little
Yeah.
habit that he had.
Huh.
It was like his little, pump up movement. And, I'm like, yeah, that's, well, you know what? It's kind of like you saying that you touch the button of your shirt.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
kind of his version of that,
yeah.
which is very interesting. But for me, I think the biggest thing, and well, touching too, one thing I found is that if you're touching somebody when you're having a difficult conversation, either because it's annoying, or like you're doing scheduling, or it's painful, that if you touch someone, if it's appropriate, of course, like if your knees are touching, or you got your hand on someone's back, or you like, it will instantly like make it so much more attentive and attentive
Mm,
and
yeah.
attentive. Just that little touch. You were talking about that earlier, like how wired we are for touch. But for me, it was really about hearing. It was really about listening, because of all the things that we do with our senses, especially our sense of hearing. Listening to other people is one of the most important. And I had a long way to go. I did a manifesto for listening, which was all the things that I felt like I needed to work on with
Mm,
my own listening, to help me become a better listener. I always feel like if something's important, it's good if I crystallize it into some kind of list or manifesto or aphorism or something. So I did this manifesto for listening, and it's really made me a much more effective listener,
mm.
because I really kind of crystallized in my mind, what are the best practices for me. Like one of the things I do, maybe you have this too, because you're a big reader, is when things got um like uh fraught, if I felt like a conversation was fraught, I realized that I had a habit of, I would jump in and suggest a book to read. Oh, you're
Mm,
going through a painful divorce, I have a book for you. Oh, your
mm.
child's like having a lot of anxiety at school, social issues, I have a book for you. And I realized this was my way of staying on topic, but moving it into a safer, less
Yeah.
vulnerable
Optimal
place.
distance.
It was a distancing mechanism for sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I realized, okay, send an email later because I can't resist making a book recommendation. I can send them an email later, but in this moment,
Mm,
stay in the moment,
yeah,
listen, paraphrase, all the things, and allow that moment, allow for awkward silences, allow for pauses, allow for difficult emotions to fill that space instead of
yeah.
leaping in and saying like, here's a reading list for you, which it was a way to redirect. Exactly. It was a way to distance. And
Yeah, it's a
it's
combination
not
of
useful.
connecting but
Yes.
distancing at the same
Yes,
time.
right?
Yeah, it's
Which was
just
actually like if I had tried to come up with that solution, I don't think I would have been so clever, but my unconscious mind figured it out,
right, right.
because we do want to have this. It is hard to be compassionate. It
Yeah,
is hard to listen. It is hard to be present with somebody in their pain. And so really thinking about listening is a way to make that effort concrete,
yeah,
so that we can really do a better job.
yeah. Um, so 2 points. One, I'm just really struck by your courage in this. I mean, casting loose from the familiar moorings of your normal MO, just
Hmm.
how you normally are, and there's something very exploratory in so much of what you're doing. It takes courage to do that,
Hmm.
and I just want to acknowledge that about you, and also it's an your example is an invitation to others to just try stuff,
Yeah.
explore. You can do it. Go out. It's great. So here I want to ask you, the nature of sensory experience is that it's receptive.
Hmm.
It's that which is given to us. And we're so trained in our culture to be constantly instrumental, going out into the world to affect it, to be the cue ball that's whacking, the 8 ball and other balls on the table. And I think about you as a person, someone who's highly instrumental, um, very oriented around sort of getting things done. And I wonder about the corrective of sensory awareness in a broad way for people to shift into, or way I would put it, it's not either or, is to be more inclusive of the receptive dimension of living, distinct from the future focused, instrumental, some often pressured dimension of living.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things is the present. Like, I think many people want to be more like to
Mhm.
appreciate the moment and to be more
Yeah,
present in their lives. Um, and the senses demand that. You can't bookmark it, you can't save it for later. Like it's happening right here, right now, and you need to experience it right here now. You can use it to evoke memories, but what you're experiencing now will take you into the moment. So I think it's really helpful in that way. And I also think that a lot of times I find that there might be an aim, and it's not that I don't want to achieve that aim or I don't think it's a good idea, but it's too abstract. Maybe it's even too transcendent to kind of figure out how to make it happen in my own life, like starting tomorrow, like appreciate the moment or
yeah,
be more present or be more mindful. It's
yeah,
like, it's not that I disagree with that. It's just like, okay, well, what would that even look like? And what I like about the five senses is they feel so vivid, they feel so concrete. And the thing that's really surprised me about the five senses is that it's like a universal tool. This is like your Swiss Army knife for
uh-huh.
being happier, healthier, more productive, more creative, more mindful, more compassionate. With just about anything that you're trying to do in your life, there's a way to use the five senses. And even things that seem to be kind of pointing in opposite directions. So if I said to you, I need to calm down. I need more serenity. I need more calm. You can
Hmm.
use the five senses for that. And I think you can instantly think of a lot of ideas of things you could try. But if I said, no, I need to pump up, I need more energy, I need more vitality, I can think of a lot of ways to do the five senses. If you said, I need to be able to sit down and just like focus on kind of unwanted tasks, you can use the five senses. But if I said, no, I want to spark my creativity and my imagination, you can use the five senses. I want to connect with other people, you can use the five senses in the
That's
present.
really
I
true.
want to connect with them in the past, you can use them to connect with them in the past. And so it's kind of, but it's concrete. And when
Yeah,
you say to people, well, can you think of three things you might want to try? Because we know the senses,
yeah,
it feels possible, it feels exciting, it feels fun. You don't have to take a class if you don't want to, you don't have to learn how to do it, you don't have to buy any equipment. Like, you could just like walk through the kitchen and smell a bottle of almond extract. You could walk into a hardware store and be like, I love the hardware store smell. And but you can think of that, it's just that there's an immediacy to it
it's
that
very
I
true.
feel like it unlocks the sense of possibility for like what we could do
Yeah.
differently in a way that sometimes you're like, I don't really know what I would do to appreciate the moment. Like, what would I do exactly? It's like using the five senses, you probably have a lot of ideas.
Right. A great path, great teacher. I
Yeah.
still want to bang on a little bit this aspect of uh, receiving, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that's actually challenging for many people.
Mm-hmm.
And as a Buddhistic kind of person, I reflect a lot on impermanence, right?
Yes.
And there's this quality of impermanence that's involves a recognition of what we're losing, in
Mm-hmm.
effect, what is leaving, what is gone instantaneously, continuously. But the other side of that is what's endlessly arising, the givenness of the
Mm-hmm.
next arising thing, which
Mm-hmm.
seems related in terms of physics, apparently, to the expansion of the Big Bang universe along its fourth dimension of time. The expansion of time is what continually draws us into the future, necessarily leaving the present behind. That's some deep stuff. But in
Yeah.
all that,
Is it
I
all
think
happening all at once? That's like,
no, no,
if
no,
you,
no. We're just being pulled into the future. We're being
mm-hmm.
continually given the next thing. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I'm just very struck by the ways in which, on the one hand, it can feel kind of scary to move more into that beginner's mind attitude of don't know, novelty, the freshness, the surprise, um, and and the leavingness of what's familiar continuously. Uh, on the other hand, our senses can draw us into a very rich feeling of being buoyed and supported by what is given to us continuously, the next sight, the next sound, the next smell, taste and touch, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so to me, that's kind of a very deep practice, actually,
Mm-hmm.
and also one that involves a certain sense of acceptance of the vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
of leaving
Yes.
behind what's known
Mm-hmm.
continuously as we receive the next sensory impression.
No, there's an evanescence to sensory. I mean, you see this most
Yeah.
starkly with smell, which is you can smell an apple blossom, the blossoms on an apple tree
Yeah.
now, but you can't even keep sniffing it for 5 minutes,
Yeah.
because it will
Yeah.
fade out. So it's not even like a familiar song that you can listen to on a loop. But you're
Yeah.
right, all these things are like arising, and time itself will take these things away from us. Time will take our own senses.
Hmm.
Often many of the senses
Yeah.
become less acute over time. And certainly we're all, are susceptible to
Hmm.
not having them to begin with, or having them be changed through time
Yeah.
and experience. So I think you're exactly right. There's something about you, this is happening right now,
Yeah.
and you don't necessarily know what will happen in the future.
I know.
Maybe that
It's
is
both
what,
scary
but
to
maybe,
receive, but it's
right.
celebratory.
But do you have, so Rick, does the idea of returning to the same place over and over and over again appeal to you? It sounds like the kind of thing that might appeal to you because of like this, how do things change very gradually over time, and like how do you stay alert to these very small changes? Have you ever done anything like that yourself? It sounds like it might be something that would be interesting to you.
Um, so there's a lot of stuff about this, including the genetics of it. So some people don't have a lot of dopamine receptors. Some people have lots of dopamine receptors. I probably do. So I'm the kind of person who can just sit in one spot and be really quite content there. Other people, like some of my relatives, they need to keep moving. They have a stimulation hunger that's very real for them. So I think there's some temperamental variation there. But the thing that just strikes me about this is that the arrivingness of the next sensory experience, right? It's continually arriving, can actually feel incredibly reassuring.
Hmm.
And if we just kind of relax about it, we can realize that we're being lived, obviously, by the whole natural world. We're just kind of an expression of it, and a very palpable, intense sense of being lived supportively. We're being supported continuously. That sense is available to us through our senses, which then can help us be more relaxed, more open, less freaked out, because we're being continually supported by the ongoing arriving of everything that's occurring. And I don't mean to get cosmic or
Mm,
metaphysical here. This is a very direct experience, and our
mm-hmm,
senses really draw us into it. You know,
mm-hmm.
the next
Yes,
sensation, the next sound, the next
they make that
sensation of
concrete.
breathing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the internal world, the six senses, if you will, imagination, the next thought that's occurring. It keeps arising, and we can feel buoyed by it, and thus lighten up and be less caught up in clinging, grasping, craving, and suffering, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
with a heart
Yeah.
open along the way.
Right, 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 right. Well, it's funny because I always remind myself, like, if I'm in traffic and complaining about traffic, it's like I am traffic. But then when
That's
I'm in
right.
nature, I'm like, I am also nature. I'm part of it.
Did this help you become more attentive to your sensory imprint on others?
Ooh, what an interesting question. I don't think so. I mean, like, with something like perfume, like, I love perfume.
Yeah.
So I wear it to bed every night, but, like, years ago, I stopped wearing it out because a lot of people just would prefer that you not wear perfume.
Uh,
So, but my others, it's funny because I was just thinking about this,
mm,
how some people have a very kind of, they see themselves from the outside very easily, like they might imagine themselves as a character in a movie or a novel. And I don't have that feeling. I almost feel not invisible in a bad way, but invisible into sort of like, I'm just sort of cruising around. I'm always sort of surprised if people recognize me on the street because I'm like, am I identifiable? Like, so I don't think actually that I thought about that as much as I should have. Isn't that
uh,
interesting?
yeah. My
I don't
angle on
think I
that
did.
is as partly the last 10, 20 years reflections about being basically a tall white guy. And so I've paid more attention to my gestures, my body language, how I fill the space in a room, making
Mm-hmm.
more room for other people, for example,
Mm,
and also just things like velocity of speech
mm,
as having a sensory impact on other people, particularly
mm,
when I'm kind of privileged with certain kinds of authority. So
mm,
that's been an angle of it for me
mm.
in terms of
Well,
sensory imprint.
one thing that I definitely learned is
Not chewing next to my wife's ear.
well, yeah, right, 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 right. Which is what somebody said to me, sometimes when people tell you things and you're like, it's true. You just
Yeah.
know that it's true the minute that they say it, even though you might not have thought of it yourself,
Yeah.
which is he said, you should always take the microphone. If someone offers you a microphone, always take it. And I said, well, why? Because
Oh,
it seems kind of like self-important to have a microphone. Like if you're in a small place and there's not that many people, maybe you just say like, oh, I don't need that. Like, I just want to be,
right.
kind of regular. He's like, no, because some people just can't hear as well as others. And maybe the
Yeah.
people close to you are like, oh no, we can hear fine, but the people in the back can't. Not everybody's going to speak up. If there's any, if an organizer is offering you a microphone, they think it's a question. And
Yeah.
the answer to the question is, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Now, in some places you're like, there is no microphone and you don't use it. And maybe you don't need it. Maybe you could use it if they had it. But that's been super helpful to me because I've been in many situations and it's like, just because you don't think that a microphone is necessary doesn't mean that other people might not need a microphone is necessary. And so this is just one of these little
That's
things
right.
where we can show consideration
Yeah.
for people without
And
even
be
really,
inclusive.
yeah, without waiting to ask or putting them on the
Sure.
spot to speak up
Yeah.
for it or to say like, oh, actually, no,
Yeah.
I would really like it. But now if I'm in the crowd and somebody says, do I need a mic? I'm always like, yes, use the mic. Even if
That's
I'm in the
great.
front, I'm a real front row type person. I can hear perfectly fine, but I'm like, you know what?
Yeah.
It's just better with a microphone. And so this
Yeah.
is just one of these small ways that we can just show more consideration for other
That's right.
people.
In terms
Once
of
it's
our
pointed
sensory
out to us,
impact.
it's
Yeah.
very easy. But it doesn't necessarily maybe occur to you in that I was thinking it more of like a self-importance thing
Yeah.
instead
Yeah.
of a am I being readily accessible thing.
So we're going to be wrapping up just in a little bit. And again, what a wonderful book. And people should definitely check out your podcast and your website and this quiz about your senses. I wanted to get in a last question that came in the chat. People can see it if they can see the chat. 35 minutes past the hour. And I'll use the name of the person who wrote it. So Shauna writes, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I have anxiety, OCD, and have noticed I am hypervigilant, but have also lost the safety feeling from some of my senses. For example, why do I count while washing my hands instead of relying on simply the touch? Any thoughts on this? In other words,
Mm,
to maybe more generalize it, for some people, uh, a particular sense is associated with trauma or with threat. And so that sense is, it's infected in a sense. It's complicated
Yes.
by other things. And I'm wondering how people, what you think people can do to reclaim what's good about that sense
Hmm.
for themselves, including
Hmm.
someone maybe who's hypervigilant.
Hmm. Well, I want to just make clear that I'm not going to speak to the OCD aspect of it because that's obviously like
Yeah,
a clinical thing that is way beyond my expertise. So I don't want to get over my skis.
yeah.
But in terms of like sort of generally like turning to the senses for more anxiety and to create a sense of safety and comfort.
Mm,
Absolutely, this is something where the five senses can be so useful. And this is a
yeah.
place where you might think about your most appreciated sense, because this is something that is already like coming to you and feels strong and engaging. But then you also might think about your more neglected senses, because there might be things that you're overlooking or that you could tap into in a new way. Like, yeah, you can't smell in the grocery store, but you can smell at the beach. And there's so many. I was talking to somebody who's a therapist who treats teenagers. She was telling me, just to give you a sense of like the range, she was
Yeah.
saying that a couple things that her teenage patients do. One is they will take, like people love weighted blankets. They'll take weighted blankets or just like a lot of blankets and create big heaps of them. And then they'll like curl up underneath them, like almost like a burrowing animal, like in there, and that they feel so safe. And I was like, I've never heard of somebody doing that. She goes, oh yeah, this is like a
Mm,
teen thing. Or she also pointed out the way teenagers will often like use a lot of lotions and potions, and they'll put makeup on and off and paint their nails and stuff. They were like, this is a way to self-soothe. Touching ourselves is a way to calm us. It's like, I'm a hair twister, and I definitely do it because it's something that helps me feel calmer, because I'm like stroking my own head, and so that's turning into the sense of touch. But the sense of smell, like maybe there are beautiful smells that, and they might not be the classic smells like lavender, because by the way, all of those are associations. There's nothing particular about the smell of lavender. That's just an association, but that association could be very strong for you. So you
mm,
might think, well, what are some things that when I smell them, it gives me that feeling of safety and comfort? And can I bring that into can I consciously tap into that?
yeah.
Maybe it's the smell of baking bread. Maybe it's the smell of pine needles. Whatever for you would associate that. Hearing, also with hypervigilance, are there things like, do you have your notifications turned on in your phone so it's like beeping all the time? Or do you have
Yeah.
like devices, alarm clocks that go off, dishwashers that have an unnecessarily harsh buzz? Like, are there things that you can do just by going through and thinking, or are there unpleasant smells? Like, I realized that I had this kind of garbage bag that I was buying for years, and I really disliked the smell, but this was a product that I was buying. Like, why didn't I buy one with the smell I like better? I don't
Yeah.
know. So it's like, if you feel like that, maybe take some time and think, okay, how can I take out of my environment things that are
Mm,
kind of sparking my anxiety or my sense of vigilance? And then what are the things that I can add that are gonna help support that feeling of comfort and safety and
mhm.
pleasure?
Yeah.
Um, and these are unique,
That's
because
great.
what is comfort and pleasure to you is not the same as what's for me, but that's part of the fun, is identifying those and figuring out ways to bring them into your environment.
What a beautiful place to end here.
Great
And
question.
Gretchen, yeah, again, Gretchen, really grateful for you. Thanks for your support of the Global Compassion Coalition. Thanks for being part of this. I heartily recommend your work. I really mean what I say here.
Oh,
It's just
thank
chock
you.
full of value. The the density of value per page, but whether it's the charm, the entertainment, the intellect, the practical
Oh,
takeaways,
well, thank you.
all of it, very high density. Uh, you know, anyway, it's been really fun to talk with you about this. And
Oh, I've so enjoyed it.
yeah, it's been very alive, and I've seen the chat comments coming in and all the rest of that. So thank you again. Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you for everyone who joined in the conversation. And thank you so much, Rick. And thank you for all the work that you're doing to put more compassion out into the world. It's so
Yeah.
important. And it's not easy. So we
Mm.
all appreciate all your efforts.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, everybody, it's a wrap. Thank you very much. Take good care. Bye bye.